Imagine you're standing on the waterfront in Port-au-Prince right now. It's the Caribbean, so, you expect that postcard view, turquoise water, maybe some fishing boats bobbing around, the heat shimmering off the pavement. But as of this Tuesday, if you look out at the harbor, that view has changed a lot. Looming over the bay, cutting right through that whole picturesque scene, is about 9,000 tons of gray American steel.
Yeah, that's a jarring image, isn't it? We aren't talking about a hospital ship or some kind of humanitarian aid vessel here.
No, not at all. We are looking at the USS Stockdale, a guided missile destroyer sitting right there in the capital's bay. It really does look like a scene from a Tom Clancy novel, but this is the reality on the ground, on the water this week, and it isn't alone.
No, it's not. You've got two Coast Guard cutters, the Stone and the Diligence, basically flanking it like bodyguards.
It's a full-on flotilla.
It is. And officially, the Pentagon is calling this Operation Southern Spear. The press release says it's about fighting narco-terrorists.
Which is a heavy term in itself, and we are definitely going to get into that branding shift. But I've been reading through these reports, and the timing here feels, well, it's too precise to be just about drug interdiction. If you look at the calendar, this Saturday is February 7th, 2026, and that is a massive date in Haitian history.
It's the deadline. It's the cliff edge.
Exactly. So today, on this deep dive, we're not just talking about ships. We are unpacking why the U.S. Navy has parked a destroyer in Haiti barely 72 hours before the government's mandate effectively just evaporates. We're going to look at the collapse of the Transitional Presidential Council, the new and frankly violent rules of engagement being used, and why this is actually a signal being sent to Havana and Caracas.
It's really a story about the U.S. completely changing the rules of the game in the Western Hemisphere.
So let's start with the hardware, because I think people hear Navy ship and they just think, okay, a boat with guns. But the Stockdale isn't just a boat.
Oh, far from it. The USS Stockdale is an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. If you follow naval tech at all, you know this is the absolute workhorse of American power projection. But more importantly, it's an EEGHS ship. It has the SPY-1 radar system, vertical launch systems for Tomahawks. I mean, this is a platform designed for high-intensity warfare. It's designed to track hundreds of targets simultaneously: missiles, aircraft, surface ships.
Right, which seems like massive overkill for drug smugglers. You don't need a Tomahawk missile or some advanced air search radar to stop a go-fast boat carrying cocaine.
You absolutely don't. That's why the Coast Guard cutters, the Stone and the Diligence, are there. They're the ones equipped for law enforcement, boarding actions, that sort of thing. The Stockdale brings something else entirely. Air dominance and electronic warfare capabilities. You park an Arleigh Burke in a harbor, and you effectively control the airspace for hundreds of miles around it.
It creates a bubble.
Precisely. It's a denial of access asset. And we have to look at the geography here. The reports all emphasize that they are in the Bay of Port-au-Prince. That's true. But look at a map. Where is Port-au-Prince relative to America's other adversaries in the region?
It's right next door to Cuba. I was looking at the charts. Santiago de Cuba is less than 400 kilometers away. The eastern tip of Cuba, Punta de Mezi, is only about 80 kilometers across the Windward Passage.
That is virtually point-blank range for the sensors on the Stockdale. If you are sitting in a military command center in Havana right now, you are not seeing a counter-narcotics mission in Haiti. You are seeing one of the U.S. Navy's most capable sensor platforms parking itself less than 100 kilometers from your sovereign territory.
And controlling the Windward Passage, too. That's a huge strategic choke point for maritime traffic.
It is the main artery between the Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. So by parking there, the U.S. creates a checkpoint. The intelligence sources we have indicate that Havana hasn't made a loud public scene yet, probably to avoid escalating, but the silence is described as heavy. They view this as a direct threat. It echoes the 1962 blockade mentality, even if the scale is different.
Okay, so we have this massive show of force, but let's pivot to the why now. You mentioned February 7th is the cliff edge. Walk us through the political mechanics here. Why is this Saturday causing so much anxiety in Washington?
Well, February 7th is historically an inauguration day in Haiti.
Yeah.
But in this specific context, February 7, 2026 marks the expiration of the mandate for the Transitional Presidential Council, or the TPC.
This is the body that was sort of cobbled together after the last government collapsed, right, to bridge the gap.
Correct. The TPC was a compromise solution. Their entire mandate was to stabilize the country, organize security, and most importantly, hold elections to transition to a permanent democratic government. The deal was that their authority ends on February 7th, 2026.
And here we are, 3 days out. Have they organized elections?
No elections. No schedule for elections. No successor lined up. And to make matters worse, the Prime Minister, Alex Didier Fils-Aimé, was recently ousted. So come Sunday morning, February 8th, technically speaking, there is no government.
It's a constitutional void. It's almost like a corporate contract expiring, but instead of a service stopping, a country just stops.
It's an institutional void. And in a country like Haiti, where gangs already control an estimated 80% of the capital, a void at the top is catastrophic. It's the signal for total anarchy. The gangs, the Viv Ansam coalition, They have been waiting for this moment to assert total control.
And this is where the U.S. position gets incredibly complicated, because usually you send the Navy to support the allied government. But in this case, the U.S. seems to be actively dismantling the credibility of the people currently in charge. I saw reports about visa restrictions.
This is the twist that makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. The U.S. State Department isn't just disappointed in the TPC. They are actively sanctioning them. Just recently, Washington imposed visa restrictions on high-ranking officials, including members of the council itself.
Who are we talking about here?
The sources specifically name Louis-Gerald Gilles, Leslie Voltaire, and Edgar Leblanc. These are men who were supposed to be steering the transition. The U.S. accusation is that they have active links to the very gangs they are supposed to be fighting.
Wow. That is a staggering accusation. The U.S. is essentially saying the government is a front for the criminal organizations.
Which puts the Stockdale's mission in a very different light, doesn't it? If the government expires on Saturday, and the people running it are considered gang-affiliated by Washington, then the Stockdale isn't there to protect the government. It's there to manage the collapse.
It's a containment strategy.
Exactly. If the mandate ends and the gangs try to seize the presidential palace or the remaining infrastructure, the U.S. has a kinetic option sitting right in the harbor. It acts as a deterrent against a total takeover. And frankly, it's positioned for a non-combatant evacuation operation, NEO, if they need to pull embassy staff out in a hurry.
It feels like they're waiting for the dam to break so they can direct the floodwaters. But let's look at the label being used here. Operation Southern Spear. And that specific term, narco-terrorist. You and I have discussed how language shapes policy before. This feels like a very deliberate rebranding.
Oh, it is. It's a massive shift in legal and military doctrine. For decades, the U.S. treated drug trafficking largely as a law enforcement issue. You investigate, you arrest, you try them in court. By using the term narco-terrorist and by placing this operation under the direction of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, the administration is moving this firmly into the realm of national defense.
Terrorist implies you aren't a suspect. You're an enemy combatant.
And the rules of engagement reflect that. One of the most shocking statistics in the source material for this deep dive is the body count. Since Operation Southern Spear began, more than 100 suspected criminals have died in confrontations at sea or in boat strikes.
Wait, 100? In maritime interdictions? That's remarkably high. Usually these guys surrender when a Coast Guard cutter fires a warning shot across the bow.
That's the old paradigm. The sources describe boat strikes and kinetic confrontations. This suggests that the U.S. assets are engaging these vessels with lethal force much more aggressively. They aren't just trying to disable the engines, they are neutralizing the threat.
That sounds more like a war zone than a police beat, and it aligns with this idea of militarizing the trade routes. If you are a trafficker, the calculation changes from I might go to prison to I might get blown out of the water.
It's a strategy of deterrence through lethality. The argument from the Pentagon is that these cartels and gangs are no longer just criminals. They are destabilizing the entire region, causing migration crises and eroding sovereignty. Therefore, they are a national security threat, not a police matter.
Which brings us to the broader geopolitical game. Because you can't look at Haiti in a vacuum. You have to look at what happened just last month, in January.
January 3rd, 2026. A date that I think will be in history books.
The arrest in New York?
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, arrested and charged with drug trafficking in a U.S. federal court.
It's still wild to say that out loud. A sitting head of state arrested and charged?
It just shattered the norm. Historically, you might sanction a leader or support a coup, but you don't arrest them like a common criminal while they are in office. But connect that to Haiti. You have Maduro arrested for trafficking. You have the Haitian council members sanctioned for gang ties. You have Operation Southern Spear hunting narco-terrorists with destroyers.
I see the pattern. The U.S. is erasing the line between political leader and cartel boss.
That's the key insight here. The new paradigm that analysts are talking about is the criminalization of hostile regimes. The U.S. is no longer saying, we disagree with your socialist policies. They are saying, you are a criminal enterprise masquerading as a state, and we will treat you accordingly.
That justifies intervention in a way that restoring democracy never really did, does it? It's hard to get international support for regime change based on ideology, but if you say, this guy is a narco-terrorist flooding our streets with fentanyl, that's a harder argument to counter.
It creates a pretext for direct action. If a foreign leader is a narco-terrorist, then parking a guided missile destroyer off their coast isn't gunboat diplomacy, it's a law enforcement action backed by the military. It effectively bypasses a lot of diplomatic friction.
But doesn't that set a really dangerous precedent? If we start treating heads of state as criminal targets, where does that stop? And more immediately, for the people in the Caribbean, does this actually bring stability or just more violence?
That is the trillion-dollar question. For the average Haitian living in Port-au-Prince right now, the concern is immediate survival. They are caught in the crossfire between gangs that rape and pillage and a corrupt government that can't protect them. Now they see American warships in the harbor. There is a hope that maybe this brings order, but there is also a deep historical trauma regarding U.S. intervention in Haiti.
It's never been clean.
Never. And this approach, the sledgehammer approach, risks escalating the violence before it quells it. If the gangs feel backed into a corner and they know the U.S. is treating them as terrorists to be eliminated rather than criminals to be arrested, they might decide they have nothing to lose. That leads to urban warfare.
And the Stockdale's just sitting there watching it all. You mentioned earlier the proximity to Cuba. Do we think this operation is also a way to squeeze Havana?
Oh, absolutely. Cuba and Venezuela are close allies. With Maduro arrested and the pressure mounting, Havana is feeling the heat. By militarizing the waters around Haiti, which sits right between Cuba and Venezuela, the U.S. is effectively severing their logistical connection. It's a blockade in all but name.
It's asserting dominance over the American lake, so to speak.
Correct. We are seeing a return to the Monroe Doctrine, but updated for the 21st century. The U.S. signaling to China, Russia, Iran, who have all been poking around the Caribbean, that this is still American turf. And they're willing to use significant military assets to prove it.
It's fascinating how the narrative of fighting drugs serves so many different purposes at once. It addresses a domestic crisis, it justifies military presence, it pressures political adversaries, and it secures shipping lanes.
It's a multi-purpose tool, and Operation Southern Spear is the sharp end of that tool.
Let's bring this back to the imminent crisis. We have about 72 hours or less, depending on when you're listening to this, until the mandate expires. What are the scenarios for Sunday morning?
Well, looking at the possibilities. Scenario A is that the U.S. brokers a last-minute deal. They force the TPC members to step down or appoint a new, cleaner interim government, backed by the threat of the warships. That's the managed transition. Scenario B. The mandate expires, the TPC dissolves, and the gangs launch a coordinated offensive to take the National Palace. In that case, the Stockdale and the Marines, if there are any embarked, might have to intervene physically to secure the airport and key infrastructure. Then there's Scenario C, a continued limbo. The mandate expires, but everyone just keeps pretending it hasn't because the alternative is too scary. But that usually only lasts a few days before the streets explode.
And in all of these scenarios, the U.S. has positioned itself as the arbiter.
The arbiter with the biggest guns.
It's striking to think about the technological disparity here. You have gangs running around with assault rifles and machetes, and then you have a ship with the most advanced radar system on the planet sitting a mile away.
It is. But as we've seen in places like Afghanistan or Somalia, high-tech hardware doesn't always solve low-tech political problems. The Stockdale can shoot down a fighter jet from 100 miles away. Can it stop a gang leader from bribing a police chief? Can it build a functioning judicial system?
No, it can't.
That's the limitation of force. The U.S. is applying military pressure to a problem that is fundamentally political and social.
But maybe the calculation is that the political solution is already dead. If the leaders are corrupt and the institutions are gone, maybe they think force is the only variable left to play.
That seems to be the grim conclusion Washington has reached. The era of nation-building is over. This is the era of threat management.
So for our listeners sitting in Ohio or London or Tokyo, why does this matter to them? Beyond the obvious human tragedy in Haiti.
It matters because it resets the global norms for intervention. If the U.S. successfully establishes this model, where narco-terrorism justifies arresting heads of state and deploying navies to manage domestic politics, that is a blueprint that will be used elsewhere. It also affects global trade. The Caribbean is a transit hub. Instability there radiates outward.
And migration.
Huge impact on migration. If Haiti collapses completely, you will see a mass exodus of refugees heading for Florida. The Stockdale and those cutters are also effectively a floating wall to stop that flow.
It's a comprehensive strategy. Stop the drugs, stop the migrants, decapitate the corrupt leadership, and scare off foreign rivals, all wrapped up in one operation.
It's ambitious. Whether it works, that's a completely different story.
It feels like a high-stakes gamble. You're betting that the show of force will stabilize things rather than ignite them.
And history tells us that in the Caribbean, those bets often go wrong.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on that terrorist designation one last time. If these groups in Haiti are terrorists, does that legally open the door for things like drone strikes on land?
Legally, yes. The authorization for use of military force, the AUMF, has been stretched to cover a lot of groups. If the administration designates the gang coalition Vivansen as a foreign terrorist organization, an FTO, then technically they are valid military targets. We haven't seen Predator drones orbiting Port-au-Prince yet, but the legal framework is being laid for exactly that.
That is a very sobering thought. We might be witnessing the beginning of a drone war in the Caribbean.
It's entirely possible. Operation Southern Spear might just be the opening phase.
Well, we are going to be watching this weekend very, very closely. It's rare that you can circle a date on the calendar and say everything changes after this, but February 7th really feels like one of those dates.
Yeah, absolutely, as the clock is ticking and the fuse is lit.
So we have a missile destroyer staring down Cuba, a Haitian government that basically turns into a pumpkin on Saturday night, and a war on drugs that has morphed into a hunt for political heads of state. It's a situation where the line between crime fighting and war has just completely evaporated.
And we're all just waiting to see what happens when the sun comes up on Sunday.
And here's the thought I want to leave you with. We are seeing the term narco-terrorist being weaponized to rewrite the rules of sovereignty. We see warships deployed not to fight navies, but to enforce political order. Are we witnessing the end of traditional diplomacy in the Americas and the beginning of a new era of direct, kinetic intervention? And seriously, what happens on Sunday morning if the sun comes up and no one is in charge in Port-au-Prince?